All right, take out your slides for chapter 11. We'll get going there. Reantal enjoyed this so much yesterday, she had to come back for more, right? All right, chapter 11, landlord and tenant. So, pretty much the whole class is about sales transactions, with the exception of these two chapters, chapters 11 and 12. Chapters 11 and 12 deal with the other real estate transactions, which it seems everybody forgets because y'all want to keep saying all real estate transactions, and you forget that there are things other than sales transactions. Those poor lease transactions that Ivy is the only one who knows about in the class because she works on the leasing side of things. So, but this chapter and the next deal with leases, how leases are structured. Now, here's what I'm going to have to warn you about before we dive into this. Forget everything you ever thought you knew about how a lease is structured, because I guarantee it's wrong. I guarantee the way you have viewed leases is wrong, the way you have thought about them is wrong, and it's going to really be a liability on the test. You need to focus on the way we present them here to make sure you get it. Does that make sense for everybody? And don't bobblehead me. If you don't understand it, say you don't understand it. Don't sit there and go, don't do that. It's okay. I have that conversation in my head sometimes. I look out there and I'm like, oh, that's a bobblehead moment right there. They don't know a thing in the world, but they're saying they do. Okay? Way back in chapter 2, we defined the word freehold. What do we say the word freehold meant or means? It means ownership. So what does non-freehold mean then? Estates that are not of ownership, or leases. Non-freehold estates are leases. So when we talk about an estate, remember the word estate is just all the stuff is over here on the table. It's all over here on that side. Everything I passed out tonight, the whole stack is over there. Okay? So when we talk about leases, they are still legal estates. What was the definition of an estate way back in chapter 2? A relationship. There's the perfect answer, right? An estate is a legal relationship. So when we say a non-freehold estate, the legal relationship is that this person is leasing the property. Does that make sense? So does the owner of the property, the landlord, do they have a freehold interest or do they have a non-freehold interest?
Freehold.
They have a freehold interest. The tenant has a what? A non-freehold interest. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, we're going to talk about 4 main structures of leases. Now, let me point this out before we even go down this road. These structures have nothing to do with how the rent gets paid. There are 2 things that you need to know about any lease. And we're only dealing with half of them so far, half of that picture so far. The 2 things you need to know about any lease are number 1, how does it end? That's the first piece we're going to talk about. So if you want to put on that note on this slide, how does it end? That's what these 4 categories are about. These are 4 different ways that leases could what? End. Later on in the chapter, we're going to talk about how the rent gets paid. Those are 2 different things. A lease is going to have to have something from both categories. It needs a way to end and it needs a way for the rent to get paid. Does that make sense for everybody? So every lease is going to be one of these 4 things, and then every lease is also going to be have a method of payment, whether it's a gross lease or a net lease. Those aren't different things than this. They are simply ways to describe the payment. This is a way to describe how the lease does what? Ends. The end date of the lease. Tenancy for years, periodic tenancy. And by the way, everywhere you see tenancy here, you could substitute the word estate. So would an estate for years be the same thing as a tenancy for years?
Yes.
Yes. How about if I said an estate from period to period? Which one of these do you think that would be?
Periodic.
That's the periodic tenancy. An estate at will would be the same thing as a tenancy at will. Does that make sense for everybody? So let's talk about them. The first one, the tenancy or estate for years. This is the one that I'm going to want to throw things about, because this is the one that you will bobblehead me on. This is the one that you will say you understand it, but you don't understand it. And the reason you don't understand it is because you won't do the one thing I asked you to do, which is forget everything you thought you knew about a lease. Let me be real honest with you. For 90% of you, not you, for 90% of you, you have never in your life dealt with a lease that actually has an end date. How many of you thought you dealt with leases that had end dates? Raise your hand, be honest. You're wrong. It's a lie. You didn't. So when I tell you that this lease is the only one that has a definite end date, you need to know that this lease is very different from every lease you've ever dealt with in your life. Did I rattle you a little bit right there? See, those leases you've dealt with your whole life, they didn't have an end date. And here's how I know they didn't have an end date. Because you had to give notice if you wanted them to end, didn't you? You had to tell the landlord that you didn't want that thing to renew. Or the landlord had to tell you that it wasn't going to renew. Because if nobody gave notice, what did it do? It automatically renewed. Folks, that is not a lease that has an end date. That's a lease where we think it might end at some point in the future. And that is not this lease. This lease has an end date. It has a very definite end date because it doesn't require notice. Remember I said these categories are all about how the lease does what? How it ends. You know how this one ends? Abruptly. Without notice. Because no notice is required in this kind of lease. If the lease is structured as an estate for years, then the landlord does not need to give notice to the tenant, and the tenant does not need to give notice to the landlord. Guess what happens? It just ends. Boom. Michelle rented a beach house for 3 weeks. Is that a definite period of time? Yes. So what is it? It's an estate for what? For years. Notice what I did there. How long did she rent it? 3 weeks. Well, they do that to you on a test because they think you won't want to choose a estate for years for something that's only 3 weeks long. But a estate for years is any definite time period. If it doesn't say anything about notice and it doesn't say anything about automatic renewals, folks, it is an estate for years. Is everybody with me on that? This is a commercial lease in most cases. Commercial leases, the vast majority of them work this way. Why do you think we don't bother with giving notice on commercial leases? Why do you think we require you to give notice on residential leases? They can be open-ended, but that's not the real reason. So they can re-rent. The real reason is tenants are stupid. At least in the eyes of the law. Because landlord-tenant law, when you start talking about residential tenants, is always written from the standpoint of these poor, pitiful tenants need protection. Whether you agree with that or not doesn't really matter. That's the way the laws are written. The law views a residential tenant as the dumbest babe in the woods that has ever existed. I mean, when you start looking at the way the laws are structured, they're all structured to protect the tenant. Well, what's the #1 way to protect the tenant? You've got to warn them when their lease is about to do what? Expire. We don't give that same protection to commercial tenants, to business owners. What do you think the law says about a business owner who doesn't realize their lease is about to expire? Oh, well, you should have. So the key here with this kind of a lease is that neither the landlord nor the tenant needs to give each other notice for it to end. When we say a year, we mean a what? A year. There ain't going to be no automatic renewal. There ain't going to be any month to month. There's not going to be any of that nonsense. Definite period of time is an estate for years. And I know I'm being forceful with that, but you're going to miss it on the test. You're going to miss it on the test because you won't pay attention to what really matters. What matters is the definite time period. Does that make sense for everybody? So let's talk about the lease that you are much more familiar with. The periodic tenancy, or the estate from period to period. A periodic tenancy, remember this is all about how the lease does what? It ends. Periodic tenancies don't end until you shoot them and kill them and knock them dead. Because unless one or the other party, and who are the two parties to a lease? Landlord and tenant. Unless one or the other gives notice, guess what this thing is going to do? It's going to renew. So is there any such thing as a periodic tenancy for a year? No, because for all we know, it's going to do what at the end of that year? It's going to renew itself. So those of you who have had residential leases, when you thought you had a lease for a definite period of time, you didn't. What you had was a lease that specified it was for a year, but then think back to that lease. What did it say right after that? And the tenant must give this much notice to terminate, or the landlord must give this much notice to terminate. And if neither one of them gave notice, then the lease would automatically renew, and it usually says as what? Month to month. Doesn't month to month sound a lot like period to period, by the way? And it's that automatic renewal that makes it different. So periodic tenancies automatically renew themselves unless somebody gives notice. Now here's the thing about giving notice. You've got to be fair with notice. If you expect the landlord to give 30 days notice, then who also has to give 30 days notice? The tenant. If you tell the tenant they got to give 60 days notice, who also has to give the tenant 60 days notice? The landlord. You can't structure it unevenly. You can't have it such that the landlord only has to give 7 days notice and the tenant has to give 60 days notice. That's not possible in North Carolina. Does that make sense for everybody? It's got to be evenly structured. Now, where do you think you would look to see how much notice is required? At the lease, in the contract. I want you to hold that in mind when we get to the next slide, okay? You look at the lease first to see how much notice to give. Does that make sense for everybody? Yes, ma'am.
What would happen if someone is paying the lease and if they're current and the owner is not paying the mortgage?
What do those two things have to do with one another?
Technically, nothing.
Okay. So, well, I'm asking you to answer your own question. What do you think? What happens to owners? Since they're not related, answer the questions individually.
Okay.
What happens to owners
They don't pay their mortgage.
that don't pay their mortgage?
They're foreclosed.
They're foreclosed on. What happens to tenants who are renting a property and the property is sold, because a foreclosure is a sale? What happens to tenants who are in a property and the property is sold?
They would still have to honor the existing lease.
You just answered your questions. Congratulations. Good job. Because they're two separate things. Trying to throw them together. Now, that has not always been the case, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this chapter. It actually hasn't always been the case. In years past, landlords didn't have to honor that lease, but they do now. Now we treat the bank, anybody who buys that property in a foreclosure sale, exactly the same as any other buyer. You come along, you buy the property, it's leased, fleas come with the dog, you got to honor the lease. Does that make sense for everybody? So your landlord's now Bank of America. That's what would happen. That's what would happen. Now, where did I say you're going to look first to determine how much notice you have to give? At the lease. Okay? Everybody good on that? You got that in your brain, right? Because this next slide will confuse you if you don't have that in your brain. What if the lease doesn't say how much notice the two parties have to give? Then we go to this slide. These are the minimums that the state of North Carolina says you have to give at least this much notice. The reason I kept pointing out you would look at the lease first is, can the lease specify different numbers than these? Yes, as long as they are what? Greater than. These are minimums. These are minimum notice requirements. So you're only going to follow these rules if the lease doesn't say how much notice has to be given. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? So the state says that if the lease doesn't specify how much notice, and it's a week-to-week tenancy, then you have to give at least 2 days notice. So it'd be 2 days from the tenant or 2 days for the landlord. And when they given notice that they intend to do what? Vacate. To vacate, to not renew. If it's a month-to-month tenancy, the minimum notice period is 7 days. And if it's anything longer than month-to-month, the minimum notice period is 1 month, or 30 days. Everybody okay with that? Those are the minimums. Could the lease specify 60 days notice? And if it does, how much notice does either party have to give? 60 days. The lease just can't go less than this. These are the minimums set up by the state, and they work for both parties. Yes, ma'am?
Is a week-to-week tenancy more common in perhaps commercial?
No. Commercial leases are generally much longer term than residential ones are.
I've never seen a week-to-week for residential.
Some people rent things by the week.
Oh, okay. I wasn't thinking.
Some extended stays rent them out by the week. There are some people, trailer parks, sometimes charge weekly rent.
Okay.
It's not a lot of week to week, but it does happen. Does happen. Okay, everybody okay on this so far? Now that's the periodic tenancy. Here's the other thing you need to know about the periodic tenancy. The periodic tenancy is also the default. If you don't have a lease that specifies in writing what kind of lease you've just created, the state creates it for you. And what the state of North Carolina creates for you is a periodic tenancy, but a specific type of one. What is that one? Month to month. The state of North Carolina says that if you don't have a written lease that specifies otherwise, you have a month-to-month tenancy. How about if you don't have a written lease at all? Is that possible?
Yes.
Yes, it is, because here's a blast from a few chapters ago. Sales contracts are covered by a handy-dandy little law called the Statute of Frauds, right? That says sales contracts must be what? In writing in order to be what? Enforceable. Therefore, a sales contract that's not in writing is what? Unenforceable. I don't like it when you say not enforceable, because then you forget that unenforceable means not enforceable, right? Unenforceable is the name. They're unenforceable. Notice I kept saying sales contracts are covered by the Statute of Frauds. Guess what kind of contracts are not covered by the Statute of Frauds? Lease contracts are not covered by the Statute of Frauds. What that means is that leases do not have to be what? In writing in order to be enforceable. A court of law can and will enforce a lease even if it's oral. Does that make sense? But here's the catch. They're not going to enforce what you discussed. They're going to enforce this. This is what they're going to give you if you don't have a written agreement. Does that make sense for everybody? If you don't have a written agreement that specifies otherwise, a North Carolina court is going to say, did you pay rent? Yes, sir. Did you accept rent? Yes, sir. You got a month-to-month lease. That's what a court of law would do in North Carolina. Notice, the only two questions I asked were what?
Did you pay rent?
Was rent paid and was rent what? Received. That is enough to create a binding and enforceable lease in North Carolina. And if they don't have in writing exactly what that lease is for, then what is it for? Month to month. Now let me bring you to a question, see if you can apply what we just talked about. Michelle is renting a property on a 1-year lease that specifies that she has to give 30 days notice if she does not wish to renew the lease. And if she does not give notice and the landlord doesn't give her notice, it'll automatically renew as another yearly lease. Could the lease specify all of that?
Yes.
First of all, what kind of lease is it? Is this an estate for years, or is this a periodic tenancy? This is a periodic tenancy, and we know that because we're talking about things like notice and renewal and all that stuff, right? It's a periodic tenancy. Is everybody with me on that? Now, Michelle does give notice. She gives notice 45 days before she intends to vacate the property. She's supposed to vacate the property. Her lease expires on August 30th. So she's supposed to vacate the property on August 30th. Everybody agree with me so far? On September 1st, the owner of the property goes to pay a visit to see what condition Michelle has left the property in. What he finds is that Michelle has not left the property. She's what we know as a holdover tenant. She's overstayed her welcome. Is everybody with me so far? Now, the owner knocks on the door and says, Michelle, why are you still here? You told me you were given notice, you weren't renewing, you're supposed to be out of here as of yesterday. And Michelle says, listen, I have a lot going on. The movers were supposed to be here on Friday. They had an engine blowout. They canceled. They're not coming until, what's today, Monday? They're not coming until Wednesday, which would be the 3rd. Does that make sense for everybody? They're not coming until the 3rd. I promise I'll be out of here on the 3rd. And then Michelle says this. Well, and the owner says, this is unacceptable. You're supposed to be out of here on the 1st. You're keeping me from renting the property. Are they going to go off and rattle about all that stuff? Yes. So here's what Michelle does. She goes and she grabs her purse and she pulls out a $100 bill. And she says, listen, I understand I'm holding you up. Here's $100 to cover the time that I'm here. I'll be out by Wednesday. Should the owner accept the $100?
No.
No. Because, do they have a written agreement at this point in time? No. And if they don't have a written agreement, what kind of agreement is the state of North Carolina going to say they do have? Month to month. How long did she just rent that property for? A month. And what is the monthly rent? $100. The owner just leased that property to her for a full month for $100. And not only that, he has to give notice to her again now. He has to give written notice again because he created a brand new lease. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? So don't ever accept partial rent payments without some sort of a written agreement, because you might be creating a brand new lease and not mean to do so. That's the danger of, see, you could never have that danger in a sales contract, because if they didn't have an agreement in writing, what's the court of law going to say about it on a sales contract? Get out of my face, it's unenforceable. But if she goes to court with that oral lease and she says, listen, look, Your Honor, here's the video of me paying him the $100. What's the judge going to do? You got it for a month. Enjoy your month. The owner's going to flip out, fall out, and cry and squall right there in the middle of the courtroom. But it's going to be a month-to-month lease. Is everybody okay on that? Okay. So that's what you have to be careful of. That is the default. Now, we've only covered 2 of the 4, but we've covered 99% of all leases. The vast majority, what do you think, which one do you think is more common? The estate for years or the periodic tenancy? Periodic tenancy, because residential leases are going to be what? Periodic tenancies. As a matter of fact, residential leases have to be periodic tenancies in North Carolina. There's no option about it. The state does not allow residential tenants to have an estate for years lease. It requires that all residential leases be periodic tenancies, because we want to make sure that the tenant gets what? Notice before the lease expires. Is everybody with me so far? So let's talk about the stuff that's by far less common. The estate at will. The estate at will. When you do something at will, what does that mean? You do it because you what? Because you want to. Is anybody going to force you to? No. That's the estate at will. There is no legal enforcement here because nobody has actually promised to do anything. The tenant hasn't promised to lease the property. The landlord hasn't promised to lease it to the tenant. The tenant hasn't promised to pay rent. The landlord hasn't promised to do maintenance. They've not made any promises at all to one another. Does that make sense for everybody? The key here is because they're simply doing it because they want to, they also have the right to do what at any time? Change their mind. Can the tenant change their mind and move out and just disappear? Never even tell the landlord? Yes, because they didn't agree to stay there. Can the landlord show up tomorrow and say, you need to get your mess out before lunchtime? Yes, because they've not made any agreement to lease the property. This is simply permission to stay. Now, here's an important question. Should you be accepting rent if you think you have an estate at will? In other words, if you've got a property and you just want to give your cousin permission, your grandmother dies and you inherit her house and it needs a lot of work. You follow me on this? And you've agreed that your cousin can stay there. Just give me $100 a month to cover the property taxes. Just give me $100 a month to cover the property taxes, and then you can work on the house and fix it up, and that way you can stay there. Are there people who do stuff like that?
Yeah.
Is that an estate at will?
No.
No, why not? What makes it not an estate at will? The $100. The $100 makes it a what? A month-to-month periodic tenancy. Because when you don't have a written agreement and the state finds that rent has been paid and accepted, what does the state create for you? A month-to-month periodic tenancy. Are you following me on that? So if you want it to truly be an estate at will where you can make them get out at any point in time, what should you say?
No money.
No money. You just stay there. Could you say you stay there, you fix it up?
Yes.
Sure. But don't accept rent.
What if they're staying there and you say, I don't want to get money from you, just pay for electricity?
Sure, that would be fine.
And they pay that directly
To the power company, and you're out of the picture. That's exactly right. What you don't want is them paying you money directly. Now, technically, it is possible for them to pay you rent, and it not be a month-to-month tenancy, but you'd have to do what? Put it into what? Writing. So think about what you have to do. You have to go pay an attorney to draft you a document. Probably going to cost you $2,000 to get this thing drafted, so you rent this thing to your cousin for $100 a month. You're just going to be better off to do what? Let them stay there for free. Because if you let them stay there for free, it's very clear that it's a tenancy at will. Does that make sense for everybody? Where there's no expectation on either side. Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying if you do take the $100, now it's month to month, and then you tell you because they got to get out, well, you get 7 days.
You got to give 7 days notice. And you have to let them stay there for the remainder of the month, because it's paid for a month, number one. And you have to give 7 days notice that you don't intend to renew it next month. Because if you forget to give notice, not only have they rented it for this month, but they what? Rent it for next month at the same price. Yes, sir, JJ.
So, you're renting a room at a house.
Yep.
They're making payments and they don't pay on the first of the month, they're not going to pay. Give them notice, is it, I know there's...
You're not, now don't confuse notice with eviction. Notice has nothing to do with eviction. Notice has to do with not renewing the lease. So are you talking about giving them notice that you're not going to renew their lease?
I guess my train of thought, I was separating the fact they may not leave, but saying that, hey, it's ended, and I'm giving them 7 days notice, they can stay another 7 before they technically need to leave.
No. How long is the lease going to be? For a month, right?
Yeah.
So they're there till the end of the month regardless. The question is not are they there till the end of the month. The question is are they also there next month? Because you've got to give 7 days notice before this month ends.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's going to automatically renew and be good for the following month.
They don't pay anything.
Well, I'm not going to say it's free. They owe the money. But, you know, that's for you to decide whether you want to sue them for the money or not. That make sense?
Yeah.
So
Okay?
the most important thing is that notice, like you said, notice means no renewal.
Correct. You
So-
give notice not to renew. It doesn't have anything to do with eviction. We haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
So when they say that 7 days, that 7 days is saying, you're gonna stay here this month, but I'm not gonna renew for next month.
That's right. And that notice has to come at least 7 days before the end of the month
That you in.
that you're in. Unless you have a written lease that specifies 30 days notice or 60 days notice, in which case you'd have to give that much time, advance lead time.
That helps the prior to.
Okay? Does everybody understand that? Are we all good? That about the notice? So the estate at will can be ended at any time by either party. And then finally, the estate at sufferance. Our good friend, the trespasser. It's actually slightly legally different than a trespasser. Trespassers never had any legal right to be on the property at all. They came onto the property illegally. Someone who has an estate at sufferance is on the property illegally right now, but they came there legally. Think of what this would be. This is a tenant who was what? They were supposed to be out, and they haven't what? Left. That is an estate at sufferance. That is an estate at sufferance. It's also called a holdover tenant. This is a tenant whose lease is ended. If it was an estate for years, it just ended. Or if it was a periodic tenancy, proper notice was given and they still haven't vacated. Does that make sense for everybody? But for whatever reason, they're still there. That's called an estate at sufferance under the law. They're at sufferance because they've been told by the legal owner to do what? Leave. Be very careful though. Don't take rent from this person. Because if you take rent from this person, you've created what? A new month-to-month periodic tenancy.
So now you suffer.
Now you're suffering. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Do y'all understand these 4 categories of leases, right? Notice it's all about when the lease what? Ends. It's all about how the lease ends. It has nothing to do with how the lease operates while it's going on. It's everything about how the lease ends. Does it just end automatically? What's that one called? Estate for years. Does it need notice to end? That's a periodic tenancy. Does it end whenever anybody feels like it? That's estate at will. And is it already over but they won't get the hell out? That's sufferance. Okay? Those are the 4 different structures of leases. Everybody with me on that? Okay? Now, we need to talk about the other side of the lease. This is the ongoing part of the lease. How is the rent paid? Okay? So we've gotten halfway there. We know how the lease is going to end. Now we need to know how it's going to operate while it's going on. How is the rent going to be structured? Is everybody with me on that? So this is kind of like mix and match. You know, you could have this type of payment structure with a periodic tenancy, or that type of payment structure with an estate for years. You know, you got to have both though. You got to have how it ends and how it's paid for. Does that make sense? So we've only talked about half the puzzle so far. Let's talk about the most common payment structure, the gross lease payment. When you talk about the terms gross and net, does gross mean before expenses are deducted or after expenses have been deducted? Before expenses are deducted. That's gross. So a gross lease payment is a payment made by the tenant to the landlord where the landlord is still responsible for all of the additional expenses of the property. The landlord has to pay the property taxes. The landlord has to pay the insurance on the property. The landlord has to pay for maintenance on the property. The landlord pretty much has to pay all the expenses of the property. How many checks is the tenant writing here? One. The rent. That's a gross lease payment. What kind of lease does that sound like for you? What kind of real estate are we likely to find a gross lease payment? Residential leases. Most residential leases are gross leases. We already said that all residential leases are periodic tenancies, so put them together. Residential leases are going to be periodic tenancies with a what? With a gross rent payment. Does that make sense for everybody? That's what I mean about combining them. It's a periodic tenancy with a gross lease payment. Here's the problem from the landlord's perspective, and I'm going to start to really talk about all this from the landlord's perspective because here's the truth. As a real estate broker, it's going to be very rare that you ever find yourself on the tenant side. As a real estate broker, if you're working on a lease transaction, there's about a 95% likelihood that you're on whose team? The landlord's team. So I'm going to start to approach this from the landlord's perspective when I talk about the pros and cons of these leases, okay? Gross lease payment from the landlord. Here's the con. Here's the thing that makes it scary. What happens when the HVAC blows up? What happens when the property taxes go up? What happens when they come put a special assessment for sidewalks in front of the property? Who's got to pay for all that? The landlord. So the thing that landlords hate about gross lease payments is that their money is unpredictable, right? Because realistically, on a gross lease payment, do I know for sure how much money I'm going to keep every month, or is it kind of up in the air based on what my maintenance costs are?
Up in the air.
It's up in the air. So all the risk is with the landlord with a gross lease. Does that make sense to everybody? Now that is very different than this one, the net lease. If gross is before expenses are deducted, what is net? After expenses. What kinds of things would the landlord love to get out of having to pay for? Property taxes. Yeah, so why not? The hell with it. I'm not paying them. Let the tenant pay that. What else would the landlord love to get out of paying? HOA dues, sure. Maintenance. Ooh, that's a big one. Yeah, let the tenant pay for that maintenance. And then what else? How about insurance? Do we make the tenant pay for that too? This is very often called a triple net lease because there are three main expenses that get transferred over to the tenant. The tenant's not only paying rent, they're also paying taxes. They're also paying insurance on the property. And they're also paying for the maintenance on the property. Well, think about that for a second. If the tenant's paying for all those things, who's taking the risk in this? Is it the landlord now, or is it the tenant now who's taking the risk? It's the tenant who's taking the risk, because now we've gone from, in a gross lease, the tenant's money stays the same month to month, to whose money stays the same month to month in a net lease? The landlord's. Because the landlord's going to get the same rent no matter what. If the HVAC system blows up, who pays for it? The tenant does. Have fun with that. What kinds of leases do you think these are? Commercial. Most commercial leases are triple net leases. So just to show you what you might see when you get out in the real world and you'll understand what you're looking at, it's not on the test, but just so you will know what you're seeing. When you start looking at leasing commercial property, you might see rental that looks like this. Property rents for $18 per square foot plus $3.75 of something called TICAM. TICAM is an acronym, an abbreviation that stands for Taxes, Insurance, and Common Area Maintenance. Remember we said it's a what kind of lease? A triple net lease. These are the three things. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. This is your rental number. You're going to be paying $18 a square foot in rent. That number is locked in. It doesn't change. This number is just an estimate. Because what could it do? It could go up. If something breaks, is that TICAM number going to go up? Oh, yes, it is. Absolutely it is. Common area maintenance. Taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance.
But that's just an FYI for us. We won't.
Yes, it's not going to show up on test. It's just if you saw it printed somewhere in literature, that's what it stands for.
Okay.
Okay? Do we understand the idea of the triple net lease or the net lease? Is everybody good on that? Okay? So the big difference between a gross lease payment and a net lease payment is that in the gross lease payment, it's the landlord who's responsible for all those expenses, whereas in the net lease, it is who that's got that responsibility? It's the tenant. It's the tenant. And generally speaking, you would see most residential leases structured as gross leases. As a matter of fact, like everything on the residential side, there's laws about that. Residential leases have to be gross leases. Why do you think you can't do a residential lease as a net lease or a triple net lease? Which one of these do you think the state of North Carolina is going to have a problem with saying you can't make the tenant pay for it? Maintenance. Maintenance is non-negotiable in a residential lease in North Carolina. You can't pass the maintenance expense off to a tenant in a residential lease in North Carolina. Maintenance must be paid for by the landlord in a residential lease in North Carolina. So therefore, you got to do a gross lease on the residential side. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, everybody good with that idea? Yeah.
I have a tenant.
You have tenants,
I
yeah?
have a tenant, and the water heater ladder's going out, so I now have to spend $1,000 for the water heater.
Yep.
It's not all installed.
Yep, there you go. Good old gross lease payment. Now, we could also have something called a percentage lease. Percentage leases happen in retail settings. It's also known as a retail lease. The percentage lease is based around the idea of charging the tenant a very low base rent on a monthly basis. But it's just the base. Because the vast majority of their rent is going to be based on how much they sell. It's going to be a percentage of their sales. In a percentage lease or a retail lease, the landlord wants a cut. They want a piece of the action. They want a certain percentage of every dollar you put through your cash register. So if you have a good month, they have a good month. That's a retail lease. Where do you think you're most likely to see this kind of lease? Shopping malls. Airport's actually a really good one, Trudy. Airports do that. They call them arcades, I don't know why they call it an arcade in the airport. But the restaurants and shops in an airport are usually on percentage leases as well. But shopping malls is the traditional example. Crabtree Valley is all on a percentage basis. Those kiosks that you see out in the middle of the mall, generally speaking, at Crabtree, they'll all have some very small base rental amount. It might be as low as $500 a month, which is pretty much nothing. But they're paying 25% of their sales. So everything they sell, 25% of that goes back to who?
Just the gross sale?
To the,
For the months.
for the month.
Is that the gross sale?
Gross sales.
That's
Gross sales. Gross sales. So here's Holly's question. It's a good one. How do they account for that? If you're going to have this kind of a system, you don't take it on an honor system, do you? So one of the first things that somebody has to do if they go put their kiosk in Crabtree Valley Mall is they have to fall into Crabtree Valley's point of sale system. So literally the mall management can sit there and know what every vendor in that whole building is doing on any given day. When Belk sells you a shirt, they know it. And those percentages are going to vary wildly between the different tenants. For example, what do you think Belk's percentage is? If the kiosks are 25%, what do you think Belk's paying?
15.
Probably about 2.5 or 3.
Yeah, I think they're gonna pay that.
Probably about 2.5 or 3 because
volume.
the volume they do is such a tremendous number compared to those kiosks. Does that make sense? And the kiosk might come in at 25%, but if they do well their first year and it comes time to renegotiate, maybe they renegotiate a lower rate. Absolutely. If the mall wants to keep them there and they're doing well, they may very well. So every one of them could have a different negotiated rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I always wondered how you can have everything's a dollar type store in a mall, and it's like, how in the world are they paying the rent? So I had no clue that the rent.
It's a percentage of the sales.
That explains how they can even operate.
Yep. A percentage of the
That's
sales.
like a little candy kiosk, like everybody buying candy.
North Carolina, what's their sales?
Sales taxes, absolutely. So that's the retail world. Now let me explain the pros of why this works well. Because the cons are obvious. You know, your rent wildly fluctuates month to month. Here's the pros of why it works well. Retailers are notorious for having very wild swings in revenue, right? If you give a retailer a flat rental expense, are they going to have months when they struggle to make that payment? Yeah. Notably, what month are they going to do really well in? December. What month is terrible if you're a retailer? January. Some retailers have negative sales for the month of January because the returns.
That's right.
For the returns. When I was a Walmart store manager, for the last 2 years I did it, we actually didn't do returns at the customer service desk on the day after Christmas. We turned the registers around the opposite direction for the first 6 hours we were open that morning. If you bought anything, you went to the customer service desk. The rest of the registers were returned. When you came in the store, you didn't go around behind. I fed them through the back of the registers for their returns.
I was a Walmart manager.
You know, we did it that way. We sure did. It went on Wendover Avenue in Greensboro. We sure did. We sure did. You know. Well, we did on the day after Christmas one year. We did $700,000 in returns. 700. I remember looking at that sales report that day, going, "Ooh, just ooh." We don't have enough room in the stock room for all this mess. But yeah, so January is a horrendously bad month for retailers. So they have a big rent payment in December when they can afford it, right? And then it drops off to maybe just the base amount in January. So that's one advantage to the percentage lease. Here's the other advantage. If you're in a mall, don't you want the mall to have incentive to help you generate business, to help drive business into your store? Think of the things that a mall like Crabtree Valley does to try to generate more business. I mean, somebody put a picture up on Facebook a couple weeks ago. I didn't see it, but I saw the picture. They were doing Christmas in July, and they decorated half the damn mall for Christmas. I mean, they had the big Christmas tree out there, and they had Santa Claus out there, and they had the train going to the mall and snow. I mean, they probably spent $20,000 in putting up decorations and taking them down. Now, that's the mall spending that money. That's not the retailers. But do the retailers benefit from that? Yes, because it drives traffic in the stores. And why is the mall willing to pay for that? Because the more traffic that hits the stores, the more sales that happen, the more money is generated for the mall itself. Does that make sense for everybody? Yes.
Do you like, as a retailer, just look at it 25% and just advertising costs? Because, you know,
To some extent you do, because that's your traffic generation, is just being in the mall, is being in that mall. And obviously, those numbers are going to vary wildly based on, is it going to be much more expensive to be in Crabtree Valley than Triangle Town Center?
Yes.
They might pay you a percentage to be in Triangle Town Center. or Cary Town Center, you know? But, I mean, I went to South Point this weekend. God help me, I went into man, anybody that said the mall was dying, they ought to go look at that place on a weekend. It's unbelievable. I mean, it is just incredible how many people were there. And I'm thinking, what is going on? But, I mean, man, back to school with this.
You don't have to wear your bulletproof vest when you go there like you do.
Yeah, Triangle certainly has developed a bad reputation over the last few years, for sure. But does everybody understand the idea of a percentage lease?
How low does the minimum go? They decide that to just according to your sales?
According to sales, absolutely, and it's negotiable on a case-by-case basis. So I'm pretty sure that Belk has the sweetest deal in the mall, because they have they have huge square footage. Because remember, not only does Belk have their original store there, but they took over, what was it? Was it Hex that they took over? It made it into the men's store. You know, so they have a whole separate. I love that now. I do like that about Crabtree's. The only thing I like about that mall, because I can drive around to the back and park right at that door and go into the men's section, and I don't have to get anywhere near that damn women's perfume counter, because I am super sensitive to that stuff, and I have to literally hold my breath and like make a beeline around it, because I mean, my eyes water. It's like, it's like a fog of smells going through there. I can't process all that. So
You're saying the bigger the retailer is, the less he's going to pay overall?
the less they're going to pay percentage-wise, the more overall. But 3% of Belk sales is a lot more money than 25% on one of one of those kiosks. Yeah. Okay. I would imagine the one that's had to significantly renegotiate theirs in the last few years over there has been Sears. And the question will become, at what point does Crabtree pull the plug on that? At what point can they find another anchor tenant to take over that space that will pay a larger percentage of sales than Sears currently does? Because they have to be hemorrhaging money in that space. They have to be.
And that would be the thing, like you're going to the mall and all of a sudden it's closed, the store is closed.
Yes, right.
You know, it's like, you know, Triangle going through that now, a lot of closings going there, a lot of people, the original store is gone. It's like, so what, everybody's suffering there, I mean, obviously
Sure.
they ain't get no money because there's nobody in that.
As the mall dries up, it takes everybody with it, right? That's the downside of the mall. As the mall goes, so goes your traffic. And of course, malls are being completely revamped. I mean, even one of the things that Crabtree has done well, and you have to tip your cap to them, is they've kept that mall very relevant for a very long time.
Yeah.
But look at the changes of it. If you'd gone in the front entrance of Crabtree 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen any entrances from the exterior other than PF Chang's and North Face. Even 10 years ago, did Cheesecake have an entrance on the outside? I don't think they did at that point in time. Did they back then? But that was it. Now look at the exterior front wall of that mall. How many stores have direct entry right from the front sidewalk now? Pretty much the whole front of the mall, all the way from Sears all the way to the front entrance, has all been opened up. And so they have revamped that mall continually to fit today's mold, and that's one of the reasons they've remained relevant over there. That place just prints money. I mean, gosh.
I think the food court area makes a difference.
I mean, it's the only place in the world that floods every 3 weeks and they clean it up and keep right on going. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen, man. I mean, like FEMA needs to come take notes on Crabtree Valley, man, because they can have a flood and have a white sale the next day. I don't know how they do it, but they do. I mean, they'll show it on the news. They show like cars floating in the parking garage, and the next day they're like, "It was a record-breaking day at Crabtree Valley today." Like, where'd the water go? I don't know how they do it, but they've been pulling it off for years over there. Like, I think with all the cost of this cleanup, y'all could reroute the creek or do something that would make it so it wouldn't flood so often over here. But, all right.
Do they have to pay for those cars to get flooded over there?
I don't know that.
They'll put signs up now.
Yeah, right. Not responsible for it, right.
That's probably in the rain.
So, I'm always distrustful of their parking garage. You stand on the top of that parking garage, you feel it move like 3 feet every time somebody drives underneath you, you know, like. And the front sidewalk. Am I the only one that when I walk on the front sidewalk there, you feel every one of those stepping stones like doing this number with you? Like, I'm like, I feel like I'm on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you know? Like, I don't like the mall. I am not a mall person. So. Full service leases. This is the last of the major rent payment types that we talk about. The full service lease. Just think about the name. What do you think this is going to be in regards to pricing? Is it going to be cheap or is it going to be expensive? It's going to be expensive. In fact, this is by far the most expensive type of lease that you can have, a full service lease. Generally speaking here, when we talk about full service leases, the tenant is not only paying one amount, it's one amount for everything, even things that you normally wouldn't think of as being the responsibility of the landlord. For example, this space is a full service lease. It means that means that not only does it include the use of the space, not only do we not pay for maintenance, so it's everything that would be included in a gross lease. What things aren't normally included in a gross lease? What things do the tenant normally pay for themselves? Cleaning, utilities. Guess what's included in a full service lease? All of that stuff, right? I'm surprised Greg doesn't have Ivy running around here turning these thermostats up every night when we leave, right? Because guess who doesn't pay for the electricity? That would be me. If I paid for the electricity, I'd probably be running around checking the thermostats every night when I left, right? And so when you see these full service buildings, usually those are the ones that are most strictly managed. They're the most closely watched because expenses can sink a full service lease, you know. And this is mostly done in office space. It's generally done in office. And the reason you do it in office space, because if you think about the way office space works, like this building next door, or even the building we're in, our space is a real outlier here. But if you go in the high-rise building next door, on any given floor, how many different tenants do you probably have? 5. 10 maybe, right? Different tenants on the same floor, right? And so they're all utilizing the same elevators, bathrooms, common areas. So you don't want to make utilities the responsibility of each individual tenant. Because what you'd have is you'd walk down in this section, the hallway would be dark because that guy in there's pinching pennies, right? And they got the lights turned off in their section. And this guy down here on the end, he's got the thermostat set at 900 degrees, right? Because he doesn't want the air conditioning on. And this person over here's got theirs set at 30 degrees because she's having a hot flash. And, you know, and so you try to have consistency in those kinds of properties. And so the best way to do that is to include all of those things, to include utilities, to include janitorial services. Does that make sense to everybody? That's a full service lease. And so usually these are also the buildings where you see some of the coolest features, because all those automation features that are designed to make them more efficient and save money, there's a big push for the landlord to put those in because it's their money that's getting spent. Like, it never fails. I don't know what happens, but at least once a week I walk in that bathroom and the sink's running. Like, the sink's just on. Who washes their hands and leave the sink running? I don't know who does that, but people do. So why do you think you would see in a full-service building? They probably eventually will come back and will be in there. The automatic ones. So that doesn't happen. Does that make sense for everybody? That's why you see the automated paper towel dispensers. They're more expensive to put in, but do they save money on how much use there is long-term? And if the landlord's paying for all that, then they're willing to put those features in. I have seen, I don't know if you've seen them yet, the coolest new sinks. I'm fascinated by stupid things. Have y'all seen the ones that the dryers are built into the sink? Yeah?
No.
It's all one thing.
I saw it in Germany.
It's all one thing. Like, you put your hand in the middle and the water comes out and you wash your hands, and it has like a V blade shaped thing that comes out over the sink. And when you finish washing your hands, you just do like this, and all of a sudden the blower comes on and you dry. Now, you got to be careful. You can't be wild washing your hands because you'll have the blower and the water going and it blows water everywhere. You know, but you got to be a little bit careful when you use them. But each sink has its own individual dryer. That's wild. That is wild. But yeah, they have them. You'll see them, I'm sure, soon.
You know,
large
Urban areas with a lot of office space, you would see full-service buildings for sure. No question. Yeah, concierge is another word for it. Yeah.
my daughter's, she's in the military, so we visited her in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw when I say that we saw the most crazy thing, the toilet. So it comes back on, I guess, maintenance, where the toilet really turns itself, the toilet seat turns, and as it's turning, the
It's
same
being
time
cleaned.
to go around
Yeah.
the whole toilet seat. You press the button, you see the whole toilet seat. Well, I said, oh Lord Jesus. Well, I said, we can get this in America. I ain't taking
Well, that's better than the ones they have in the airport in Chicago. If you've ever been to Chicago O'Hare Airport, they tried something like that, except it's definitely the dumber version of that. Rather than the toilet seat itself spinning, they have like a plastic baggie that's wrapped around the toilet seat, and it spools around so when you press the button, it's like pulling this plastic condom around the toilet seat, and it never works right, it just looks like.
It dried it.
Yeah.
You can see the sanitizer. It
This
came
is
back
like-
and dried. I was looking 2 Somebody gotta get this
I have a question. Did you stand there and yell out, "It's spinning, it's spinning"?
Did you get it on tape? I think I did. I gotta look back.
The spinning reference is a specific one. If you got it, good for you. If you didn't, Huh?
Can you elaborate?
I cannot elaborate. It's more explicit than I made it right there, but it has to do with spinner rims. I will just say that. Definitely worthwhile. Very funny. Okay. All right. Ground leases. Now, this doesn't really have to do with how the rent is paid, but a ground lease is a very specific type of lease. With a ground lease, the property isn't really anything other than the dirt. The tenant is only leasing the ground itself. There might be a structure on it, but the structure was put there by the tenant because the land was leased vacant. Now, if the tenant is spending all this money to build a structure, do you think this is going to be a short-term lease or a long-term lease? Very long-term lease. This company right here is not the inventor of the ground lease, but certainly the company who made the ground lease famous. This company does not make money selling hamburgers. This company makes money on real estate. The way McDonald's franchises work is that if you want to open a McDonald's franchise, the first thing you do is cut them a check for $350,000. That's step one. And then you give them a proposal about where you would like to locate your restaurant. And they go and they look at that piece of property and they decide if that would be a good location for McDonald's. If they agree, then McDonald's will buy the land. And they will lease it back to the franchisee with specific requirements for how the store has to be constructed. And because McDonald's owns the land, and they usually lease these things for 20-year spells, when that lease comes up for renewal, the franchisee has to do whatever it takes to keep McDonald's Inc. happy. Because what if McDonald's doesn't renew the lease? Then what does the franchisee have to do? Vacate. And you can't really move what? The building. So who does the building become the property of? McDonald's. This is why when you see McDonald's franchises, they are by far updated much more often than their competitors like Burger King or Taco Bell or Kentucky Fried Chicken or any other fast food chain. Because when those leases come up for renewal, McDonald's is notorious for coming in and saying, well, we'll renew your lease, we'll give you another 20-year lease, but you've got to spend $3 million on updating the facility. And if you don't, we won't renew your lease.
Which is important because people don't want to build no old McDonald's.
There you go. So, one that was recently threatened was the one down here. The franchisee down here on Wake Forest Road, the McDonald's down there, was quite seriously threatened by McDonald's about not renewing their lease. And so that's why they're now updating the interior of that store significantly. Now, they haven't made them do the outside of it, but they did make them do the inside of it.
The one on Glenwood too, I think.
The one on Glenwood, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
They have McDonald's have the highest standard for all.
Well, I mean, and they can because they've got all the leverage because they own the land, right? They own the land.
Well, standards as far as the building, but
I'm
not
sorry?
the food.
I don't know. I don't know about the specifics of all of them, but that's how their business model operates. That's how they, yes ma'am.
Could it be as simple as like a mobile home, like trailer park, they all rent the land? that they
Yes,
own?
and generally speaking, with mobile home leases, those are ground leases. You're only leasing the ground. So they could be as simple as that as well. Cell phone towers are usually done with ground leases. So you lease the ground to the cell phone company, they construct the tower. Usually those are going to be for very long terms, 99 years. You might see as a term on a ground lease. Does that make sense for everybody?
Well,
Okay.
Believe it or not, I work for McDonald's and I work for Chick-fil-A. Actually, McDonald's only got it better because Chick-fil-A don't let you own nothing. They don't even only own.
Chick-fil-A owns the whole
That's right. They
thing,
don't
right?
own
Yeah, they
the
license it out, I think. Yep, they're even stricter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they was good.
As far as essential provisions of a lease is a contract, so the same rules apply. When we talk about basic contract law, people got to be mentally competent, they got to be at least 18 years of age, they got to be sober. All those same requirements are in place. We have to have for a legal act, we got to have consideration. So same rules apply for basic contract law as they do for leases. Nothing different there. This word you're very likely to see on an exam. Again, Ivy knows this word. She's probably the only one of you that does know this word. And if you don't know this word, you can be very easily talked into the wrong answer on a test. Upfitting. This is a commercial real estate terminology. Let me tell you what upfitting is not. It's not anything with the word up in it. It's not fixing the property up. It's not updating the property. It's not upkeep on the property. And they will put all of those in test answers. It's not any of those things. Upfit is customizing the property for a specific tenant. The tenant needs this specific thing in that space. And rather than the tenant pay for it, who's going to pay for it? The landlord is. So somebody give me a type of a business that you think somebody might want to open.
Restaurant.
A beauty salon. Restaurants go into a beauty salon. So beauty salon, are they going to have certain different requirements for a space than other businesses might have? Like what? Plumbing, right? Plumbing would be the first one that would come to mind for me. The wash basins. You got to have all that plumbing. Worse than a beauty salon is a nail salon. Yeah, because a nail salon, not only do you have to have the wash basins, but you got to have the yuck foot basins there too, right? You know, with all those chains and yeah. You got to have a wax room. You got to have a dish room. I'm afraid of all that. No, I don't want any of that. But we've got to customize that property. Well, normally speaking, in a commercial setting, it's a triple net type of lease. So who's responsible for all those expenses? The tenant is. But would that be a big barrier to a tenant moving into a space? Like if you're trying to attract that beauty salon from another facility and they've already got their wash basins and they've already got their setup going on over there, it's almost impossible to lure them to your building and say to them at the same time, man, this space would be perfect for you after you spend $100,000 on plumbing to get it ready for yourself. What are they going to say? I'll stay where I am. So upfitting is the landlord, in order to entice the tenant, saying, we will pay for that customization. We will build. How many of you ever seen a sign that said, we'll build to suit? Yeah. That's what upfit is. It's building the space out to suit the tenant's needs. Like, for example, this space that we moved into looked nothing like this. This is an office building. Do you think it had rooms this big in it? No. What do you think this room was? Bunch of offices. 6 separate offices.
Right here?
This room. 6 separate offices made up this room previously. And so it was a huge undertaking to knock all those walls out. Now, once you knock the walls out, what else do you have to replace? The flooring's got to be replaced. There was a single-seater men's and single-seater women's bathroom.
Wow.
That would work real well, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I was like, no. You've not seen our crowd when we go to bake. We need toilets, you know, and several of them. So all of that expense, guess who paid for it? The landlord did, in order to entice us into this space. Now, the idea is they're enticing you for a long period of time at a higher rental amount. So they're getting it back with the rent over a long period of time. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, that's called an upfit. The key thing there is it's customization. Upfit is not making. Somebody said, well, we made it more energy efficient. That's upfit. Well, maybe not. Maybe some tenant wanted it to be open air. You didn't make it better for them. Does that make sense? Upfit is customization for that one particular tenant. Not just making generic improvements to the building, it's making it specifically right for this tenant. So like in the case of a restaurant, what are some things a restaurant would need as upfit? A kitchen. So like the fire suppressant system, right? The hood vent, the grease traps, all that stuff would be examples of good candidates for upfit in a commercial lease. All this 3-part sinks and stainless whatevers. Okay, everybody okay with all that? Yep, exactly. Those are all examples of upfit. Okay? Assignments. We talked about assignments and contracts. What do we say an assignment was? When you change what on a contract? The party. Same thing is true when you assign a lease. One of the parties changed. Which party do you think would be changed? Is it going to be the landlord or the tenant? The tenant. You're changing the tenant. This happens a lot in commercial leases. It's pretty uncommon in residential leases, and here's the reason why. Most of the time, residential leases are relatively short term. Most residential leases last for how long? A year. That's relatively short term. In commercial real estate, you kind of start the discussion around about 7 years. And it might be 7, it might be 10, it might be 15, it might be a 20-year lease. Let's just stick with 7, the low end of the spectrum. Is it possible that a business could go out of business in a 7-year time frame?
Yes.
Absolutely. And if they do, they're still on the hook for all of that rent. So, we got a problem because we've got somebody who's not in business that's on the hook for all this rent. Could they find someone to take over that space?
Yes.
That would be an assignment of the lease. Now, who would have to give their permission for that? The landlord would, but most likely the landlord would give their permission because they're much more likely to collect the rent from somebody who's actually in business than somebody who's out of business. Yes, ma'am, Michelle.
I thought subleasing,
I haven't gotten to subleasing yet. So, is it specifically a sublease question? Okay. So far all I've talked about is assignment. So just hold it a second and see if we can answer it here. Yes, ma'am.
Since you mentioned that, my son, he's a barber, and his old barber shop, the guy's already retired. He was talking to him about taking over the business.
Yeah.
Because he's ready to get out of it. And I was just telling my husband, I said, I think he would have to, if he's in that lease, assign it
Assign the lease.
to my son. If
Right.
he decided to do that, right?
As long as he has the landlord's permission to assign the lease. We need to have a conversation with the landlord to find out if the lease can be assigned.
Okay. 'Cause him
And
just-
most likely it can be.
Because him just deciding to retire won't in the lease.
Correct, that's exactly right. He decides to retire, he goes out of business. He can sell the business to your son, but what he can't do is transfer the lease without the permission of the landlord. And so he needs the landlord's permission to assign that lease.
And if he doesn't transfer, he's still on the hook for that money.
That's exactly right. The old owner of the business, the previous tenant, is on the hook for the money. That's exactly right. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, a sublease is a little bit different than an assignment. In an assignment, the original tenant's name is coming off of the lease and the new tenant's name is going onto the lease. In a sublease, both names go on the lease. Rather than the original tenant coming off, that name stays on there and the new tenant's name goes on as well. What that does is it gives the landlord 2 shots to collect what? Their money. So generally speaking, a landlord would prefer a sublease over an assignment.
Okay.
Okay? Now what you got about subleases?
I didn't realize both names had to be on there. I
Yeah.
thought
Both
it was
names.
the same as the assignment.
That's a sublease. And very often subleases are for less money. What if I've gone out of business and I was renting that space at $18 a square foot and I can't find anybody to take it over at $18 a square foot, but I find somebody who'll take it over at $15 a square foot. Well, they're going to pay the landlord $15 a square foot and I'm still going to be on the lease responsible, so I'm going to pay what?
Oh, the other 3?
The difference. I'm going to pay the other 3.
Oh, wow.
So he's still gonna get his money regardless.
The landlord's still going to get their money, they're just going to get it from a combination of the 2. And I look at that as being better than being on the hook for the whole $15 a square foot or $18 a square foot. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So that's a sublease. And again, you'd also need the landlord's permission for that. Okay? As far as the landlord's right to enter the property, they don't have one. Generally speaking, the landlord doesn't have the right to enter the property unless they have what we call reserved that right. Remember we talked about early in the class, we talked about this right of possession. What is the right of possession? It's the right to what? To be in, to occupy the property. It's what we give to a tenant. We give the tenant the right of possession. Well, if the tenant has the right of possession, then what right does the landlord have to possess the property? None at all. Unless they have reserved that right. And how would a landlord reserve the right to enter the property? Put it where? In the lease. They put it in the lease. So if they want the right to come in the property to do maintenance, they need to put it in the lease. We talked about the fact that leases don't have to be in writing, but they do if they go for a long enough time, and that time is 3 years. If leases are for more than 3 years, now we don't mean somebody's been in the property for more than 3 years. We mean the lease. When you look at the term, the way it's laid out, it is written for more than 3 years, then it must be in writing. And not only must it be in writing, it should also be recorded. And here's why. Let's say, because Ivy works in commercial real estate, let's say that I've leased this space for 7 years. So I feel pretty good about I've locked in where I'm going to be for the next 7 years. That makes sense for everybody as a tenant? Now, generally speaking, when a property is sold, what does the new owner have to do with the existing leases? They have to honor them. Does that make sense for everybody? And that is true for any lease, unless the lease is longer than 3 years. And that new owner only has to honor any lease for longer than 3 years if that lease has been recorded. The idea is that if it's recorded, it would come up in a title search. And so therefore, when the buyer does their title search on the property, they would see that this property has been leased for at least 3 years, and then they could make their decision about whether or not they wanted to buy. Here's what it's there to protect against. Somebody comes in and buys the property and finds out there's a 25-year lease on the property. Does that make sense for everybody? So, in order for that lease to be enforceable on that new buyer, it needs to be what? Recorded. Now here's where I'm going to get to the part of this where I don't think you really have thought all that through. Who does it benefit to have that lease recorded? Does it benefit the landlord or does it benefit the tenant? The tenant. Because, now, Ivy, I know she would not do this. She's such an upstanding person, right? But let's say she's showing a potential buyer through this building, right? She shows them the property. And they say, well, now, how paying school real estate? How long are they leased for? And she said, well, they got 6.5 years left on their lease. And the buyer says, well, that's good. And Ivy goes, it's better than that. They got 6 years left on their lease. So they're locked in for 6 years. They can't walk away. But they didn't record their lease. So the day you close, what can you do if you want to?
Kick them out.
You, not only can you kick them out, but you can just come in and do what with their rent? Double it. Because their lease is not what? It's not recorded, therefore it's not enforceable the minute you buy that property. Is it enforceable from my perspective as the tenant?
Yes.
Yes, because I signed it. But it wouldn't be enforceable on who? The new landlord. That sounds like a bad deal for me as a tenant, doesn't it to you? Here's the funny thing, and Ivy had nothing to do with it. When we first got the lease from Hobbs Properties, last paragraph in the lease, I'm telling all your stories here. Last paragraph in the lease, it said, tenant and landlord agree that neither party will record this lease in any county clerk of court's office in any jurisdiction in the state of North Carolina. It was in the last paragraph of the lease. I did. I read the whole thing. Oh, I know you did. I know you did. And because it was boilerplate. It was just, you know, it's been used 100 times on page 72. And I took a big X and X through it. Can I do that?
Yes, you can.
Because I'm not functioning as a real estate broker now. Who am I signing for? Myself, right? I'm not doing it for a client. I'm doing it for myself, right? And I put a big X through it. And I sent it back to Hobbs Properties attorney. And he called me that afternoon. He said, I want to know who put this X on this lease. And I said, I did. And he said, let me tell you something. I've been doing this for 30 years. He wasn't mad, actually. He was laughing on the other end of the phone. He said, I've never had anybody understand what the hell that paragraph was about to mark it out. I said, well, you never dealt with somebody who teaches real estate for a living. And so they deleted that paragraph. And not only did they delete it, but as soon as the ink was dry on it, what do you think I did with it?
Recorded
I took it down there and recorded it. Because it protects me as a tenant, right? And so that's something to understand. If you go into commercial real estate, you need to understand that law in North Carolina. So if you see it on the test, everybody good on it? And I'm not picking on house property. Every commercial landlord does that because most tenants don't know that that law exists.
So the tenants and the landlord, or both, can record it, it's not.
Either can record it, but it benefits the tenant by far to do it.
Gotcha.
So how do you report it? Just take it down there?
Take it to the county courthouse, they'll record anything for you. You got a love note you want to make public record, they'll record it for you. $26 a page, they'll record anything you want.
So,
It's actually, in Wake County, it's $26 for the first page and $6 for every edition.
so it's more beneficial for the commercial owner to not record.
Correct, it's better for them not to record it. That's right, right. Yes, ma'am, Michelle.
Not about more or less recording, but when you mention commercial, I just want to know what your overall thoughts are about working in commercial real estate.
I like commercial real estate, but it's a different world. It's vastly different than residential real estate. Residential real estate is all about the feels. Do you like people? Do you like making people happy? Do you like, do you like being part of their life and seeing their kids and getting invited to their birthday party? Commercial is about who you know. It's all a networking business. It's all about, it's a, let me see what I got hidden in this folder deal for you. It's not, it's that vastly different. There's no MLS for commercial real estate, first of all. The vast majority of commercial transactions don't happen in the MLS. If, for example, I'm a member of something called Triangle Pair List, which is just a mailing server for commercial brokers in the area. So if I had a tenant who was looking for a specific property, I would go in there and I'd send an email to that mail server and it says, I got a tenant who's looking for between 3,000 and 4,000 square feet in Class A office space, and it needs to be on the Wake Forest Road corridor. And anybody who had that type of listing would email me back what they've got. And say, here's what we got, here's what the cost is, here's how much we're offering in the Upfit allowance when you want to take a look at it. And so it's going to be all that, and there's nowhere for me to go search for those things because they may not be actively marketing those things. They may not have them out there. They may not even think they have it available until I send that email, and then they start emailing all their clients and saying, hey, I got somebody looking for this space. And somebody says, oh yeah, I got that space coming open next month. Oh, it's very much a who you know business.
So it's all more word of mouth?
Much more word of mouth. It takes much longer to get established in commercial real estate because people have to trust you, they have to know you, and you have to be connected. You have to know what's going on.
Yeah. And you need to get in those associations.
Yes, you need to start to meet those people if you're going to work in commercial real estate. Would you agree with that synopsis?
Well, you
Yeah.
make probably so much more money doing that.
Oh, it's definitely numbers oriented. I mean, nobody cares about the feels in commercial real estate. It's all about the dollars and cents. Does it make sense? Dollar and cents wise. You don't have to like anybody in commercial real estate. You just got to like the numbers at the end of at the bottom of the balance sheet. That's it. That's it. Okay. Now we're switching gears completely back to the residential side. Ivy was happy. We spent 15 minutes in commercial. That's it. That's your hurrah right there. We're done. Right back into residential real estate. The reason we spend so much time in residential real estate is two reasons. Number one, the vast majority, what area of real estate are you going to practice in? Residential. Number two, it's where all the laws are. Commercial real estate is very much unregulated by comparison to residential real estate. If two parties want to agree to it in a commercial transaction, they can. But the residential side is very regulated about what you can do and what you can't do. So on the residential side, we've got this Residential Rental Agreements Act. This is a state law, and it governs any property being leased for what kind of purpose? Residential purposes. So any property that's leased for residential purposes falls under this act. Look at the first thing it says here. We've got a warranty of habitability. It says the property must be safe for human inhabitation. That's the first requirement of the Residential Rental Agreements Act. And then it says this is not what? It's not negotiable. That means the tenant and landlord are not even allowed to negotiate about the condition of the property. If it's broken, it must be what? Fixed. Simple as that. On the residential side, you don't get to negotiate about repairs. Repairs are the responsibility of the property owner, and they must be done. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. Now, some basic requirements of the Residential Rental Agreements Act. This is where they define habitability. It says you got to have heat capable of maintaining 65 degrees. You got to have working plumbing and electrical systems, and you got to have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. That's not a very high bar. That's bare bones. Here's what you need to understand. That's not true for most residential properties. Because here's what the Residential Rental Agreements Act also says. It says, this is the bare minimum for even thinking about renting it out. But you have to maintain it in whatever condition it's in, or better, from the moment that tenant looks at the property. So notice, it does not say air conditioning is required, does it?
No.
But if the property has air conditioning when you show it to the tenant, do you have to maintain the air conditioning?
Yes.
Yes. That's a basic contract law idea, because in essence the tenant rented it expecting it would have what? Air conditioning, and therefore you have to maintain it. If you provide a refrigerator, first of all, does the law say you have to provide a refrigerator? No, but if you choose to provide one, do you have to maintain it?
Yes.
Yes, you do. You have to maintain everything that you provide as a part of that property as a residential landlord, and it is not negotiable. What we mean when we say not negotiable, what if the tenant says, don't worry about fixing it, just take $200 a month off my rent? Can they do that?
No.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is no negotiability about repairs on the residential side. It's very regulated. Very much so. Now, what happens if the landlord doesn't maintain the property? This is a very common question. What can the tenant do if the landlord doesn't live up to their end of the bargain? So what if the landlord isn't fixing things or maintaining the property in the way they should? First of all, the first step is always to give the landlord written notice that the repair is necessary. One of the common mistakes that tenants make in this state is calling the landlord about a repair, because the law says you have to give written notice. So what should you do about the repair? If you're contacting the landlord in a residential lease, what should you do? Send them an email. Send them a certified mail. Send them an email. Doesn't matter how you send it, but send it in writing. And that way you've got a date. This is when I first notified the landlord of this issue. Does that make sense for everybody? So if you've given the landlord reasonable time, now the law does not say what reasonable time is, so that's going to be left up to the magistrate or judge that's here in the case. But the law says reasonable time. If you've given the landlord reasonable time to make the repair, and they have not done so, the tenant has one option, and one option alone as far as recourse. Is everybody listening to me? One, move out. That's the only option the tenant has. Move out. The state says that you can't be held responsible for that lease any longer because who's already breached it?
The landlord.
The landlord has. By the landlord not making the repair, they have in essence breached the lease, which gives the tenant the right to do what? Move out and not be bound by the lease. The tenant doesn't have any other legal rights. What might the tenant be tempted to do if the landlord's not fixing something? Not pay. Fix it themselves and take it out of what?
Rent.
Take it out of the rent. No. 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 The tenant in North Carolina never has the right to withhold rent in any way from the landlord as long as they're still in the property. Okay, is everybody all right with that? And these are all residential rules. Yes, ma'am.
Unless the landlord, for whatever reason, even though they shouldn't, but says, hey, you don't have to pay me such and such because.
No.
So it's.
What did I say? It's not negotiable.
But so if the landlord says that, you have to say, no, I can't, I still have to go ahead and pay you?
I have to pay you and you have to what? Fix it. That's exactly right. That's what not negotiable means. They can't come to some sort of a friendly arrangement about this thing.
So you saying if the landlord doesn't fix it, and you know, I already tell them no, they seem to fix it, and then I just give my stuff and move out.
Bye.
I ain't gotta tell them nothing, I give them no money.
Bye, Felicia.
Felicia don't get no money. Felicia should have faked and still get no more money. Okay, good.
Just
Okay.
bye.
But that's the way you didn't pay your rent, 'cause you gotta do that.
But here's the catch. You gotta pay rent for every day you still occupy the property. You can't withhold rent. So you've paid rent, but you're leaving so that you don't have to pay what? Future rent. Does that make sense for everybody? This is called constructive eviction. You need to know that terminology. It's called constructive eviction. When the tenant evicts themselves, it's on the previous slide. It's called constructive eviction when the tenant evicts themselves from the property. Now, additionally, the tenant might have some rights after they move out. They could go and file a lawsuit against the owner of the property and sue for the rent that they paid while the property was in disrepair. So, give you an example. Let's say Vanessa's renting a property and it's February and the heat goes out. Is that a problem?
That's a problem.
Absolutely. So she sends an email to the landlord on February 6th. Heat's out, don't know what's going on, it's freezing in here. She doesn't get any response. 2 days later, she sends another email to the landlord. I haven't heard back from you. By the way, that's always what you do. Don't just sit there and wait and not hear back and say, well, I never heard back from them. Document that you haven't heard back. How do you document you haven't heard back? You send another email that says, I haven't heard back from you. Because if this ever ends up in court, you're going to need proof that you gave them an opportunity to do what? To fix it. So 2 days later, she sends another email. Hey, I haven't heard back from you. Now the pipes are frozen because I got no heat. You got to do something about this. And then on February 12th, she moves out of the property. That's a constructive eviction. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, in theory, she could then go and file a lawsuit against the owner of the property. Because she paid rent on February 1st for the whole what? The whole month of February. Did she occupy the property for the whole month of February? No, so she's definitely owed some rent back. And she's probably owed rent back all the way till when?
When it first went out.
To February 6th when it first broke. And so she could file a lawsuit against the owner to get back the rent she paid during the time that the property was uninhabitable, was in disrepair. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because when you think about it, what is that could really push the landlord to do it? Because I know a lot of landlords, because they don't have, like you said, a reasonable time set, some of them will milk the cow and don't go ahead and take care of the property.
What I will tell you is that the courts very much frown on landlords who don't do maintenance. And the courts very much favor the tenant in a case like this. If the tenant has actually taken the steps and can prove, I notified the landlord in writing, I sent them another email, and they still didn't do anything, it's going to be very rare that the court's going to hold that against the tenant. They're going to probably find in favor of the tenant.
Can they give damages, like,
They
damages?
can.
Now you got the cost of
Moving costs.
Yeah, you got
Absolutely.
cost
They
of
can
moving.
also sue for compensatory damages and those kinds of things. Absolutely. They
Got
should-
sick because it was cold.
Yeah, sue for medical.
You can sue for medical bills. All those things could happen as part of that lawsuit. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? So remember, repairs must be done. It's not negotiable. Can't withhold rent. The legal eviction process, so we talked about constructive eviction, that's the tenant evicting themselves. Do we sometimes need eviction to work from the other perspective? Yes. The landlord evicting the tenant in North Carolina is called summary ejectment. The summary ejectment process is the landlord evicting the tenant. It is the only legal way, I stress the word legal, way for a landlord to evict a tenant. Are there other ways that landlords try to get creative and evict tenants? Yes, they're all illegal. Those are called self-help eviction. Showing up with a shotgun on the front porch, that's self-help eviction. Changing the locks, that's illegal. That's self-help eviction. Taking the doors off of the house, that's illegal. Oh, I've heard one worse than that. Somebody told me that there was one property manager in the eastern part of the state who took the toilets out of the house.
Oh, wow.
That's very illegal. The only legal mechanism is the summary ejectment process. Is everybody okay on that? Now here's what you need to know about summary ejectment. Summary ejectment is usually heard by a magistrate. It's a court case. Court cases are slow. I'm sorry, it just is slow. About 45 days. That's about the minimum time frame to evict a tenant in North Carolina in the residential side with a summary ejectment. Is everybody okay on that? So here's what I'm going to tell you. Summary ejectment is very rarely the best way to go. What is the goal? If you're filing for eviction, what's the goal? Get them out. What's the best way for them to get out? Leave on their own. Leave on their own. So you need to find a way to convince them to leave on their own.
Take the toilets out.
Well, you cannot take the toilets out. I'm going to tell you that in my experience, and I have fairly extensive experience as a residential property manager. Wish I didn't, but I do. My experience is that you attract a lot more flies with honey than you do vinegar. Think outside the box. Get them to want to leave because you're being so sweet to them. Here's the reality of the situation. What's the most likely reason I'm filing for summary ejectment? Non-payment of rent, right? So let's say I'm going to file for summary ejectment. How long do you think most landlords wait until they file for summary ejectment because somebody hasn't paid rent?
90 days.
Well, 10 days is the minimum. It's the minimum you have to wait, but very few landlords actually file at 10 days. Because remember, filing's not free. It costs you $400 to file.
About 3 months, 2 months.
And that's just to file. You've got to pay service charges because they have to be served by the sheriff's department. What if you got 4 kids renting a house from you? How many of them have to be served? All 4 of them. So you got to pay 4 separate service fees. And what if their parents co-signed the lease for them? Do the parents also have to be served with that summons? And what if those parents don't live in North Carolina? Now you got to pay service fees in Roanoke, Virginia, and Bakersfield, California. Is it going to be very expensive to file that eviction? You might spend $800 out of your pocket as a landlord just to file. Now, keep in mind, let's say they're a month late on the rent when you go file, because you've been dreading it, you've been putting it off. They're a month late. Now, you go file. Spend all that money. They're going to get served by the sheriff. The sheriff's going to come to their door and hand them service papers that says eviction proceedings have been begun against them. Now, here's my practical question for you. Are they going to be happy-go-lucky about paying you rent for the remainder of their stay in that facility?
No.
No, they're not going to pay you anything. Pay you no mind is what they're going to pay you for the rest of the time they're there, right? So, how long did I say the process is going to take? 45 days. So that's 45 more days where you haven't collected rent. You following me on that so far? So let's say the rent's $1,500 a month. They were already $1,500 behind when you filed. It cost you $500 to file the action, so now you're $2,000 in the hole. Now you don't collect rent for another month and a half. That's another $2,200. So you're $4,200 in the hole by the time you get to the actual eviction proceeding. Does that make sense for everybody? You're $4,200 in the hole. You get to the eviction proceeding. You win, of course, because the landlord almost always wins because they haven't paid the rent. Now you have a 1-month security deposit. Ooh, you got $1,500. Is that a reasonable thing to say? Okay. So now they've been evicted. They've been kicked out. The sheriff has shown up again. This time the sheriff has a padlock and a gun and says, get out. What condition have they likely left this property in?
Holes and everything else.
Trashed. Because they made up their mind a long time ago that they weren't getting their security deposit back anyway, right? Because they owed you rent. And so they thought, I don't care, I'm not cleaning this place up. Hell, I'm not doing that. This is the process that tenants go through mentally. So now you're out $4,500 by the time they even show up, and you go and you look, and the property is a mess. And it's going to take you a month and a half to get it cleaned up, not to mention the cost of getting it cleaned up, but a month and a half to get it back into shape, to get it rented again. So you're out like $7,000 by the time you actually get a new tenant in this property. Does everybody follow me on that? That's the progression of a summary judgment. Take a different path. Go back to when you were 1 month late on the rent. They owe you how much money? $1,500. You go visit them, you knock on the door. And when they come to the door, you say, listen, I understand. It happens. It happens all the time. I don't want to see you have your credit ruined. I don't want to see you have to go to court. I don't want to see you have an eviction on your record where you can't rent something else. I am willing to forgive the $1,500 that you owe us. And furthermore, I am willing to refund in full your security deposit under 2 conditions. I come back on Friday and you're out, and this house is immaculate. I want it scrubbed, I want the carpets clean, and I want it ready for a new tenant to move in. Will they do that? Yes, they will. Yes, they will. How much am I going to lose the other way? You want to cut off your nose to spite your face, or you want to talk about the money? See, that's the difference in being a property manager and being an owner. A property manager looks at it from that perspective. A property manager says, let's figure out the way to get to the least possible loss here, the best possible result. Does that make sense for everybody? And very often that means not going the summary judgment route.
So, like I'm saying, in the apartment, especially in apartment complexes, they'll just put the little yellow sign, and if you don't pay in such time, then we'll go and do the summary judgment. So,
yep.
And to like do a scare tactic.
Right, they're just threatening.
Yeah, okay, so that's just a scare tactic, because I'm like, there's no way they have like 800 people living, they just
go file all that stuff. No, they wouldn't have enough cash on hand to file all the suits. That's exactly right. Yes, ma'am.
Say they do file, can they hold you responsible for paying the court costs?
Absolutely. But here's the thing. Holding you responsible and actually getting the money are 2 entirely different things. You're going to walk out of there as the landlord with a judgment for all of that money. It makes the nicest, as my grandfather would say, outhouse wallpaper you've ever seen in your life. Because that's exactly what it's worth.
And attorneys will reduce it to $10 a month to pay back, you know.
Exactly. You're never going to see the money. That's the reality of the thing. And so I'm not telling you how to manage property, but I'm saying what I've learned over the years is that sometimes the opposite approach of what you think might work actually works the best. Yes, ma'am, Molly.
I've never been a property manager, but do you get to write those losses off at the end of the year anyway?
Well, yeah, it's part of managing the property, sure. You know, you would take it out of the property's cash flow report. It's called a collection loss.
Okay.
It's called a collection loss. Be in the math we do tomorrow night. Right, versus taking a $7,000 loss. That's exactly right. You take the small loss now to avoid the big loss later. Yep. Everybody okay on that? Okay. So no self-help eviction. This was Michelle's question from earlier about protecting tenants during the foreclosure process. And what do we say that that has to happen during foreclosures now? The new owner, whether it be the lender or somebody else, whoever buys it at the foreclosure sale, what do they have to do with the tenants? They have to honor the rest of their lease. So whatever written bona fide leases are in place, stay in place. And the new owner has to honor that lease. That was not the case prior to this law passing. It used to be 10 days notice.
When did this law pass?
In 2010, during the financial meltdown. Because what you had was a lot of tenants who were paying their rent and a lot of owners who were not paying their mortgage payment, and all of a sudden the sheriff shows up and evicts you because the property's been foreclosed on.
California, I think, got hit hard.
Every state did. Yes,
I
ma'am.
had a couple friends not too long ago. Like one friend, she was renting her home, and the, previous owners were going to sell the house, and so they told her, you know, they're gonna have new owners who are trying to sell the house, and I guess the new owners will want to occupy the home, and they give her like 30 days. So, but by reading this, we technically have to give her 90 days. Or how does that go?
No, was it a foreclosure? It's not a foreclosure, they have to honor the lease, period. Any written lease has to be honored, period. They have a written lease? Then it has to be honored. I'm sorry? No, well, she said they had a written lease and it wasn't ended, right? It was still, the lease was still in effect, right? Yeah. So they should have honored the lease. Now, does that work with a lot of tenants who don't know any better?
Yeah.
Sure it does. But that's not the way the law works.
Yeah, my friend went through this too. The owner, they've been paying, they didn't pay the owners directly, they paid a property management group. And they were renting a house, and the owner wasn't paying the mortgage. So they went through foreclosure. Property manager didn't tell them anything, but all of a sudden they got an eviction notice.
Was this prior to 2010?
No, this was after. This was just like 3, maybe 4 years ago.
Shouldn't have happened 3 or 4 years
And I
ago.
told her that, and she was asking me what to do. I mean, I didn't know nothing, but I told her, I don't think she can stop paying her rent.
No.
But you still got to pay your rent
You just have to pay it to the new owner.
to the property management people, and then they'll take care of the rest of it.
They have to legally.
Yeah, but they still was telling her she had to get out. But she's like, why you gonna make me get out and still asking me
They
for rent
can't.
at the same time?
They can't. Somebody doesn't understand the law there. Okay. That is our stopping place for tonight. So that leaves us with the Tenant Security Deposit Act to cover tomorrow night, and that'll finish chapter 11. And then we will be doing math of chapter 12, which is property management math. All right? I'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Sure, why don't I do this, why don't I save it for tomorrow night and we can all share?
Bring some ice cream too.
That sounds delicious. I'll put it over there.
So I can't even eat right Okay, you done it.
They don't have to slide air, but if it's there, then they have to maintain it. Okay.
That's just the
I knew when you first came in, girl.
Property has to at least have.
I just put it all together. And now when it is on, you got this Bluetooth on this new side. Oh, I love it, I love it. Now, which one is that? Yeah, I've been around for a long time. Yeah. I got around. Okay. Okay. Which one you at, Broadway? Okay, I worked up there before. I used to work for, well, I went to Walmart. My girlfriend was program for PJs and Ghana. Her name was Great. And that's the one right there. And so I worked with her in Ghana. And then they trained me up to one at Broadway. And then I went down to work for her in Ghana. And I never worked with her. Then she came over to Capital.
Please came here because I've seen her because I'm now, they sent me rotating, Carrie, Catherine, Briar Creek.
because she wants a couple of licenses. So I have to
Okay.
fill in.
Okay.
So I've seen her,
Yeah.
because I've seen her at the golf.
Yeah, Chiquita's the bomb.
Yeah.
Every time I work hard, she's business woman.
No nonsense.
All that in the bag of
Yes.
chips.
Yes, she's
Chiquita's
got
the
it
bomb.
going on.
She's got it going on. So I knew that smile. I knew it. It's been a long time though. It's been a real long
The
time.
early 2000s.
Yeah, 2009 when I left him down, 2009, messing with Cheryl, crazy Cheryl.
Well, she's
You
no
know,
longer
she,
there.
I know her crazy.
She's
It's
no longer
it's behind that road, not long after, about a year after
Yes.
working with her. I left, was it 2009? I think it, no, it might have been,
I think I left out of there.
I might have been
I'm
2000.
trying to emulate what they're gonna do.
Yeah, 2009, cause I
So all I'm
went
trying to
there.
do, there's your score, okay?
Because I was
Cause I was at Target in 2003.
You good?
And I left Target, I went to Chick-fil-A for a little while. I wanted to get out of food service. Oh, I gotta get out of food service. So then I went to Walmart. I was trying to get out of food service. Went right back to Bojangles, and then I'm like, I gotta come out. So I came out in 2009, I came out of Walmart, and then I went to Bojangles to 2012. And then I left for Bo, I broke myself since.
Did you enjoy they
So
said
my
it?
money been funny, but I work for me, you know what I'm saying? Cause I do life insurance full time. So since 2013, 2012, I actually went to the bank, Fort Silver, in Walmart in New Bern. Not New Bern, but New Hope, away from Fort.
Okay.
Cause I told my husband I didn't want to be a manager
You got
anymore.
right and wrong.
I didn't want to deal with people and their attitudes. I just want to sit back. My girlfriend like, they ain't doing nothing, sleeping on you. You know you're supposed to be a manager. Every time they came in the bank, they thought I was just a manager. They thought I was a bank manager. I was like, no, I'm not a bank manager. I'm sitting. I'm just sitting. And I think I did that to 2015.
Always a
So
good sign.
2015 was
Whether
full
or
time.
not,
So it's 3
Stop
years.
being able to apply what you read.
It's gotten around.
Yeah.
And now
It's a
this.
real good sign.
Oh, this was actually, I had came 2015 to do this. And I was supposed to get my license, but I had a death in the family. I had a death in the family. I'm a preacher, so I had to do the funeral. My first funeral in Georgia. And then I had a big program the
Because they
next
constant
week.
complaint,
And
people
throw
call
out
and
Mr.
ask
Tate.
questions.
And
you know,
Travis
they'll
saw it
say,
at one point. And look
you
at
know, well,
this.
it's right there
I
in the
wrote,
manual. If you
I
just
wrote the
look at
answer
the
right.
responses, they don't
Circle,
circle it. They've never been taught that. Because you're supposed to try to memorize.
Travis, I looked at it, I said, Travis, you see it. You see it. You see
And then
it.
it's gone. Whereas if you had taught them the skill of looking at the index, find the thing we're looking for, find the rule that applies to that, you must apply the rule.
Yeah, I was
They'll
there.
never lose
And
that.
I said, then when I came
That's
back,
exactly right.
when I
But
came back
you can't
the
if you
second
don't know
time,
how
I
to
went
find it in the
out of
first
the
place.
funeral, I just couldn't get time to study. And it's all jumbled together the second round, so I was done. And then, I don't know, 3 years has passed just that quick. So I told my husband, I can't let the whole time pass. You know, so we got to
Time is of the essence.
It is. You know what? I wrote, when he put that on that thing, I wrote that on my paper. I said, I gotta live by this. Something's wrong.
Time is of the
Something's wrong on that
essence.
thing.
Listen, when we send texts to each other, I'm always quoting her real estate quotes.
Oh, so y'all know each other?
Yes.
Okay. She looked familiar to me too when I first saw her. I just didn't know why. But I knew her for some reason.
She said she does. I was like, I don't know her. I'm looking up again tomorrow.
Because when I saw her smile, I'm like, I know her from somewhere. Yeah, you was there all during the time. Mr. James was there, all of us.
Yes.
You know, there was a lot of mess going on. I didn't know a whole lot of that was going on. I did not know, girl.
Yes.
You know my girlfriend told me when I left my girl, you too busy back there in that back room.
It was painting place going up in there.
I said, what? When I heard all the stories, girl,
Yeah.
I said, where was I at?
It was a hot mess.
They said you was too busy back there working them negatives and working them inventory.
It was a hot
Yeah, I did not know half of that mess was going. Especially Mr. James and I don't know. I might have to get the details from you because I don't know if I got all the details. That just say what I.
That's a big closet. It's like that closet back there. The bones go.
The bone. Oh, that mean the real bones. Look,
Like this.
that mean the real bones. Then I'm gonna leave right there.
There's some dinosaurus bones. Y'all don't say
My goodness. Oh, this hurt arm, jeez. Come on, Marlo. You gotta give up something. Travis,
Yo.
I gotta ask you something now.
Okay.
I know I'm borderline late every Monday. I've been having some things conflict with there, so I'm borderline. I'm trying to get up in here before at least 15 after.
No, you're fine.
I did a lot better on the test than I